Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation podcast, where we discuss the exciting innovations that lie ahead for organizational ground transportation. Each episode, we cover topics tailored to those resolving transportation-related challenges and provide tips, tools, and trends that will inspire you to stay ahead of the curve. And now, here's your host, Daniel Perez.
Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation. Today, we have a special guest. Mr. Leaf, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hey, Daniel. So excited to be here. Happy to talk about what we're doing over here. My name is Leaf Jiang. I'm the CEO of NODAR. It's a startup based out of Boston. We just raised our Series 8 round, so we're pretty early. But we're in the space of trying to make sensors for autonomous vehicles and cars that drive you safely. So just a little about myself. Yep, go ahead.
Again, thank you. It's a pleasure having you here today, especially to all the listeners. As we all know, we're really diving deep into the future of transportation. And what a better way to have a guest with you, like yourself today, with your expertise and to tell us more of where you see yourself and the future of transportation going on your end.
Yeah, sure. So a little about myself. New Yorker. I grew up in New York. Went to high school there. Was excited about engineering from a young age. So went to MIT for college and stayed in the Boston area ever since. It's an exciting place. Did a bunch of research in LiDAR systems, which is one of those key technology to open up the space. And it was in a time when no one even knew what a LiDAR was. For those who don't know, it's like a radar, except using light. You're trying to find how far things are by bouncing light off of it. So I did research in that area at MIT for about 12 years before starting up this company. And the problem that we're seeing right now is, how do you scale up? How do you go from 100 cruise robo-taxis in San Francisco to 100 million cars produced a year? And we're trying to position our technology to enable that. And that's what we're currently working on.
Got it. Thank you. Now, this is super exciting. So let's break it down for us, please. So what is the biggest obstacle that you're seeing right now? Not from an engineering perspective, right? So if I'm a 5-year-old, help us understand what is the biggest obstacles in order to really unleash sort of the autonomous drivers.
Yeah, I think from number one is just consumer acceptance, right? And laws, like, are you allowed to even do such things? That's a big thing. Forget about the tech. And what we're finding is that a lot of the regulations get developed in Europe first. So the UN, believe it or not, comes up with regulations. There's something called UNR 157, which is like one of these first regulations that talk about the car that actually drives on its own, and you could read a book, right? This is a law for L3, so-called unassisted driving. Now, it's very limited. It's for, traffic jams under 60 kilometers per hour. But there is actually a regulation that was adopted in Europe. And in Germany, the first L3 cars are coming out. And this is being spearheaded by Mercedes. They have in their S-Class, they've got L3 cars in Germany and soon to be in the US in the next year or two. So this is pretty exciting. So these are unlike any of the cars that we're used to in the United States, like even Teslas, right? You're not really allowed to not pay attention. You have to pay attention to what the car's doing. But here, for the first time, the manufacturer will take sort of legal responsibility if something goes wrong while you're watching your movie in sort of this traffic jam assist mode.
Wow.
So that's one barrier.
So from a consumer acceptance, the way that I see this too, Liv, is at the beginning when Uber and Lyft came into the market, we had so much resistance from a consumer acceptance, but little by little became the new norm, right? So if you were to fast forward, if you were to fast forward, how many years do you think we're far from seeing the autonomous vehicles becoming the new norm from your personal perspective?
It's going to depend where. So in the US, people are starting to say fully like L4 autonomous vehicles are probably in the 2030 time range. But we're seeing L3 rolling out in the next couple of years. So you're going to have autonomy, but it's going to be very limited. Limited, what they call ODD, or operational design domain. So it might work only on highways. It might only work good weather at slow speeds, things like that. But eventually, more and more cases will be opened up, and then I'll eventually get to L4. So one thing that what we've learned is that it's not going to be autonomous vehicles suddenly tomorrow. It's more incremental development. It's going to be like, okay, extra features here and there until we get to that point of full autonomy. China, however, is different. So there's some new market reports that have come out saying there's going to be significant penetration of robotaxis in 2025 to 2030. So that's not that long from now. And the difference there is there's just a very different approach of adopting technology, government support, etc. So things might go faster in China versus the U.S. I guess we'll.
Got it. Thank you, Leif. And let's step back a little bit. So when you mentioned L4 and L3, for all the listeners that are just getting started on sort of this journey, what's the L4 and L3?
Yeah. So there's it's a Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE. They came up with this classification long time ago for autonomy, and it goes from L1 to L5. L1 is sort of like the car takes control in one dimension, like braking and stopping, like your cruise control type thing. L2 is but you need human assistance, by the way. L2 is still human assistance. Human needs to pay attention, but the car can like change lanes now, right? So that's L2. It can change lanes or change steering. Still human. L3 is where the human gets taken out of the loop. That's when you can start reading and playing games, look at your phone, that kind of thing, and car drives itself, but in very limited conditions. And you need to be able to take over the steering wheel if things get bad, meaning like, I don't know, the weather gets bad, and it's like, please take over the steering wheels, and then you have like 30 seconds to take over. And if you don't, then it assumes you had a heart attack and it'll stop in the middle of the lane. Not very graceful, but that's actually what it's programmed to do. And that's L3. So it's like limited autonomy. L4 is kind of like full autonomy, but not everywhere. Like it might not go on uncharted roads or off-road or very low traffic areas. And L5 is basically full autonomy everywhere. So when people talk about full autonomy, they typically say L4 because working everywhere all the time, all conditions is yet a huge hurdle. So you don't really have to operate in every single condition to have value.
Got it. Thank you for the explanation. And let's take a step back. Kind of help us understand how you got into this industry. Like what caught your attention?
Yeah. So when I got into the industry, so I've been following it for a while. It was there's this transportation sort of huge shift, like the way in which we're starting to move people, the way in which we're starting to go from point A to B is fundamentally changing, right? This is super exciting. Like this is going from horse and carriage to like automotive. Like it's a big thing. And one of the things that was limiting that was the sensor. So it was found that in early days when they were doing experiments that they're like, oh, getting the 3D information really makes this problem easy enough where it could do the computation on the car to solve the problem. And so that was an area that I was working in for a long time. And there was just a better way of bringing this 3D information onto the car. We use wide baseline stereo camera. We could get into that. Probably your viewers, probably too technical, but just using cameras, and then you do some software and it turns into 3D point clouds. It's just like looking at different angles. It's very much like how your vision works, stereo vision. 2 images, looking at parallax or disparity, and you can kind of figure out where the distances are. In any case, it's that 3D information that really opens up this whole opportunity. And so I was in the right place, the right time. It was clear to me that LiDAR wasn't going to get there anytime soon. So it was just the right it was a big thing that I wanted to be part of at the end of the day.
Hey, congratulations on being one of the pioneers in the industry. So help us understand more about NODAR sensors and more about your current role. How long you guys been in business, and what is the complexity and challenges that you guys are experiencing, and what is it that you guys looking to resolve at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I started the company, founded it in 2018. And those were the garage days, right? Like you start out of your garage with some concept and things, you're trying to find your product market fit. You're trying to tune your tech. You're trying to get some traction for your stuff. The next year there, we got angel funding and grew the team a little bit and eventually got our seed and then our Series A. And now we're at 12 full-time, 25 if you include all the contractors. Yeah, so that's how we started.
Got it. So now you said you guys on round C, you mentioned?
A.
A.
Yeah. So there's different rounds of financing, and it's a venture-backed company. So
venture. Okay. Got it. So what are the most challenging situations that you guys are currently experiencing, especially sort of entering an economy recession as well? I don't know how this is impacting you guys as well.
Yeah, so everyone's is a bit worried, right? Like there's definitely, you see a lot of pullback, especially in the tech sector. A lot of people losing their jobs, etc. This is all part of the game, right? Like this is just tech repeating itself over and over again. You have 20 competitors and it goes down to 2. Same in the search space, right? I mean, back when Google was a puppy, we had, Alta Vista, all sorts of search engines. And now, right, we have 1, basically, maybe 2, you can say, search engines. And then that's kind of what's happening in the space. So consolidation was always going to happen. The real question is like, will autonomy be a thing? I think everyone says yes. It's just, when is it going to happen? So it's not like if, it's a when question. And for us, our technology is very general. We build sensors. It applies across a spectrum from L2 vehicles today to L4 in the future. So we have a market today, and we don't need to wait for L4 to happen to have customers. So we're not too worried.
Got it. So help us understand who's the consumer on your side as of today, Liv?
Yeah, so the consumers on our side is a B2B business, right? We're selling to OEMs and tier 1 suppliers. So, they need to do, typically the OEM or the car maker comes up with some features. And these features, say if it's like some sort of autopilot, has some sensor specification, and they need to get certain, measurements with a certain resolution and distance and these kind of things. And we would come in and bid on those contracts and say, our sensor can do that to this type of resolution. And so it's mainly a B2B. So the customer is not going to know necessarily that our software is running on the car. It's all behind the thing. It reminds me of a professor that says, good engineering is usually not noticed. Like, you notice things when things stop working. So if we're doing our job right, you'll never know that our software is in your car, right? Because it's doing its job. It's driving you from A to B and, gets you there safely. You shouldn't notice it. You should notice the movie you're watching or whatever you're doing in your car.
Good engineering is normally not noticed. I love that, Lane. Thanks for sharing. So for all the listeners here, especially for the transit authorities, for a procurement officer or for a transit authority manager that is managing a fleet of 500 to 1,000 buses, how is this sort of technology going to impact their roles and responsibilities, and what can they do to sort of start creating some partnerships with NODAR sensors, or like what do you recommend?
Yeah, so on the bus and shuttles, right, there's a lot of work by a bunch of companies out there to try to automate that. We're finding for example, ZF is building autonomous shuttles, and these shuttles need to be able to see all around them and make decisions. So it's a question really of on the fleet operator, like, is that it doesn't make sense for them to go fully autonomous? Is there a problem? You know, do you have a simple enough problem to start with that where it starts to make sense? But I think right now it's always like it's incremental, right? So you're going to find the easy stuff that gets automated away first. And you're seeing that, right? Like shuttles in the airport are already running without humans.
Correct.
Because it's a very controlled environment. So you're going to see things like truck yard operations is another one, right? Where it's a bit more controlled. As a truck yard, you've got a fence, so it's not like the general public's in there. So you have a lot more control over the environment. You'll see a lot more automation happening there. You'll see automation happening in places where you don't have enough drivers, right? So like L4 trucking is a perfect example. Long haul trucking, where you have lots and lots of hours of tedious driving on the highway. That's super high value because we just don't have enough truck drivers in the US. And you're going to start seeing that as something that gets automated. And the complexity goes up. You know, robotaxis are harder, right? They have to deal with a wider variety of situations. And as you get from unmarked lanes to snow and icy and other sorts of weather conditions, that adds complexity. So I think, if anything, if we look at the last few years as guidance as to what's going to happen the next few years, we're going to see that it's going to be more of an approach of filling in the low-hanging fruit and then expanding from there.
Very well said. So with the low-hanging fruit, do you see sort of the Ubers and the Lyfts sort of monopolizing the market, or the largest manufacturing companies, Ford and all these different manufacturing companies sort of starting to monopolize how we as humans probably wouldn't even own a vehicle later down the road, right?
I think that's going to be a while from now. But, you know, when I started, I'm like, well, my daughters might not even need a driver's license. Now I'm like, they do need a driver's license. So I think, you know, timelines for full autonomy are getting pushed out. I think that, you know, I think that what we'll see in the coming years is, again, a slow consumer acceptance of more and more operations getting pushed to the car and the computer. We're going to find that, you know, the computers on cars are going to be more centralized. They're going to be more capable. They're going to be sensors that you don't even know. You're looking at all the things around the car, like, what's that, right? Like, there are going to be cameras and lidars and things sticking off of it, but it'll be seamless, right? I think number one, when people talk about car design, it's like, it's got to be beautiful, then it's got to be functional. So I think the future car is going to look a lot like the car today. It's not going to look kind of hokey pokey with a chicken bucket sticking on top. So yeah.
Awesome. So switching subjects, how does the autonomous vehicles will compete with flying vehicles, you know, 10, 20 years from now? Because that's another animal that we still haven't discussed, right? Like, so I know you're devoting your whole career to autonomous vehicles, but then once we have the flying vehicles factor coming in, how is that going to play it out?
People are working on that. We've been talking to companies that are working on flying vehicles. Like, they want to use our sensors too. I think that, you know, I don't know what the timeline is for that, honestly, but I think that what we're going to see in the next few years is not necessarily people getting moved by air as much. You're going to start seeing like drone deliveries getting big, right? So like getting those Amazon Air, right? Getting the medicine to you in 2 hours, right? Using a drone network. And so there's a lot of players putting money in that, not just Amazon, but Walmart and also Alphabet too, right? So they're really making a long play on getting drone deliveries. So maybe I would see that come first. And then once you have that density of air traffic low, sort of within that 500 meter space of altitude, once that's worked out, then I think that the human air transport will have that infrastructure that's already been built up to go. So I think if we look at it realistically, you know, air drone deliveries, there's already some tests that are happening in a couple of towns. Maybe it scales up by a factor of 10 each year, optimistically. So, you know, we're looking at least 5-10 years out for like people transport via these humongous drones, right?
Yeah. So with the sensors that you guys are currently developing, is that guided towards the flying vehicles too that could be utilized in that sort of technology too?
Yeah, so the way that our sensor works is like triangulation, basically, to find the distance to something. So you have two cameras. The farther you put them apart, the more accurately and the farther you can see. So aircraft, which often have long wingspans, give you this great baseline to do this really long range view. That's why it fits very nicely physically. Same with a car, right? A car could be 2 meters, a truck could be 3 meters wide. I could put my cameras on the sort of outside of the car and really triangulate very precisely where things are. And that's really the physics behind what we're doing. And so that's part of the reason that the airspace is a natural fit. There's also infrastructure, there's agricultural markets, there's others too. But any sort of sensor that can generate 3D point clouds fairly easily has a lot of application.
Got it. And what's the correlation between the smart roads and the sensors that you guys are currently developing?
Yeah, so smart roads, it's called like V2X, right? Vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle communications. And the idea there, right, is to have sensors along the highway that feed, real-time traffic and data to the vehicles to have them make smarter decisions. Right now, a lot of focus is putting all the intelligence on the car. And the reason for that is getting all the different individual municipalities to adopt the same level of service of sensors everywhere is a bigger task than what folks have realized, right? Like with towns that could barely afford the paint on the road, are they going to put LiDARs on every streetlight? I mean, it's just very expensive, and it's a bit future-esque, but and so that's why a lot of folks have focused on sensors on the cars themselves. But obviously, if you put sensors in infrastructure or on traffic lights and on poles and around highways, of course, that's going to make things better and safer. And this is something that folks have had conferences and talked about for, I think, a couple of decades now. So, yeah, it's slow to roll out.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what's your perspective in regards to electrical vehicles? Is that something that you guys are getting involved to? Or it doesn't matter whether the vehicle is natural gas or EV, you guys still developing the same sensor?
Yeah, so EV helps us. I mean, I think we work on any vehicle, right? It's the sensor, whether your power comes from, ICE or internal combustion engine or a battery, it actually doesn't matter for the features we give. But there are some nice side effects of electric vehicles that are pushing sort of this autonomous vehicle aspect forward. One being you have this now opportunity to redesign and rethink the whole platform. So, bringing in centralized compute, having enough battery power to more easily drive the sensors and the computers. It's just an easier thing on EVs. The other thing is, in some sense, OEMs need to differentiate themselves, right? So if everyone's just a skateboard with a battery on wheels, like what's the difference between like the different brands, right? So it's the feature. It's actually going to be that AV or ADAS or the software on top that kind of differentiates these brands, because the consumer's like, well, why should your battery with wheels cost more than that other guy's battery with wheels, right? So I think what we're going to start seeing is a few things. One is software playing a bigger role in cars in general. We're moving away from this idea of a static product. It's, I buy this car, it's got some processing power, and I expect it to improve over time with software updates. And we're seeing that with Tesla, right? We're seeing that software updates improving the autopilot or features on the car itself, whereby, you have the car in 15 years. When you buy it the first day, it might be very different than the last day you own it, right? It might have like way better neural networks or way better processing in terms of like the algorithms that are used to navigate. And that's very different. That is very different than how we imagined cars like 10, 20 years ago. You bought it and it was supposed to be the same for the whole time you owned it. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I think it's going to become more in some sense like your cell phone, right? It's a platform over which you expect things to update and improve.
Instantly evolve, yeah.
Yep.
So Lee, in regards to sort of the journey, you mentioned one of the biggest hurdles is the consumer acceptance, but besides the consumer acceptance, especially if we're about 8 years away to be totally in the L4, what other obstacles are getting on the way to get there, right? And as consumers, what can we do to sort of help, with the awareness and consciousness to get to where we're going?
Yeah. So, I mean, the technical part, right, is safety. Then that plays into acceptance. Like, we need to get the technology better than a human driver in terms of accidents per, million miles or whatever. And as a consumer, right, not all things are built equal. Like, if you look at cars today and you look at the emergency braking, the AEB, there's like a minimum set of requirements they need to match. And most people don't know that, like, they're not all the same. Like, some AEBs are far superior to others. And I think on the consumer side, like, they don't know that, right? They buy one car, they buy the others, they all have that AEB mark, and they're like, oh, okay, I've got emergency braking. But what they don't realize is some cars don't work at night, some don't work on pedestrians, some only work on cars. And I think there's this lack of just because it shows a certain feature, it doesn't mean they're all the same across, right? So I think part of it is, what needs to happen is like this consumer education part of like, what am I really buying? Why is this worth more to me? Like this feature that you're adding in safety. Why should I pay an extra $100 for it or whatnot? And on the sensor side, you need to have sensors that support that advanced stuff. So our sensor can support a pedestrian AEB. It could support like bicyclists. We could work off any objects like bricks or, random broken tires. I mean, that's what one should expect. But by the way, none of the AEBs today can work like that, right? It doesn't work on arbitrary objects at arbitrary speeds. And that's it's often a shock to people when they hear that, like, oh, I thought I had emergency braking, but not really. It'll work on, maybe a car in front of you, but.
Yeah, so you brought a great point. So if in 5 years from now or 8 years from now, especially with the L4, how do you foresee sort of the sensors working? Are they literally braking on your behalf in the event of an emergency? Like, how do they know how to react to all these unexpected situations?
Yeah, that's billions and billions of dollars put into solving that problem, man. I can't do that in a few minutes, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's what we'll find is that the problem has been solved in a large part using very expensive sensors, like too many sensors, like lots of LiDARs, lots of radars, lots of cameras. And heck, you've got L4 cruise vehicles driving around San Francisco. You've got Waymo vehicles driving around in Arizona. I mean, they're there, right? And they're not killing people often, at least Cruise and Waymo. I haven't heard of that. And I think it's about now like scaling, right? Like we don't need a couple $100,000 of these sensors. I mean, safety in some sense is accessibility. Like, you want it on everybody's car. So you got to reduce the bill of material where everybody could afford it. It could be on, your standard run-of-the-mill sedan. And so that costing is important. That's why we chose the camera-based technologies, because cameras are cheap. Cameras are mass-producible. And it's a software-based approach. Moore's law scaling on compute. It's cheap, essentially, and it gets cheaper every year. So I think the key to safety is not necessarily being super perfect on 10 vehicles that 10 people own. It's about being really good on millions of vehicles. That's what makes a difference, right? So having a technology that can scale to millions of vehicles, I think, is the key. And any little bit you do to improve like people's odds of survival or reducing accidents, you multiply it up by millions, it's a big deal.
Awesome. So for all the entrepreneurs that are listening to us in the transportation space, what opportunities do you see in the horizon for entrepreneurs that are looking to get sort of in the autonomous vehicles, the smart roads, flying vehicles? Is it the batteries? Is it sensors? What do you suggest, and what do you see from your personal perspective?
Yeah, where are the opportunities? So if you look now at sort of this market, it's considered an old market by venture capitalists, right? They're like, oh, this has been around for a long time. This is like the has-been in some sense, right? For early investment, super early investments. But I would say that there's always opportunities. You need to be creative. I can just in general in our space, right? The people are still trying to reduce down the bill of materials. So if you've got smarter ways of doing that and getting it more accessible, then you have a shot, I think. In terms of the drone stuff is, I would say, fairly new in some sense. There's a lot of things that still are Wild West and need to be figured out in that space as well, drone delivery. So I'm sure there's opportunities there. But yeah, it's hard to give, what exact business plan you need to be successful. I think everyone needs to do their homework to figure that one out.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So for all the listeners that are listening to the show, how can they find out more information about yourself, about NODAR Sensors? How can they partner up with you?
Yeah, so you could check out our website. It's nodarsensor.com, NODAR. And, I'm on LinkedIn. You're welcome to check out what I've done. If folks are looking to scale their fleets and work on pilots to prove out stuff, you can reach out, see what can be done there.
Perfect. Thank you. We will add all the notes episodes at the end of the show. So please make sure you like and subscribe. Leave, it's been a pleasure having you on our show. Again, we're very grateful to have you here. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the future of ground transportation. We appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the show.